All right. Today on this episode of the Conveyor Podcast, we have Peter Moot from Promi. Promi is an AI-powered promotion personalization tool designed for e-commerce. It's a Shopify app. This Y Combinator-backed startup was envisioned by two co-founders that met at Uber. And today we have Peter, who was leading product for discounting at Uber. So welcome today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to talk about a few interesting topics. I want to talk about early go-to-market, selling, improved pricing strategy, which is something that doesn't sit neatly into a corporate org chart. We will also talk about e-commerce selling, Shopify, the future of marketing and personalization, and working with early customers. So, Peter, let's set the table. Give me sort of the 411. What's the status of Promi? Where are you at today?
Yeah. So we went through Y Combinator's kind of summer 2024 batch, and we were very much kind of starting right around the start of that. I will say kind of our journey, my journey, it took a little longer also before that too. So as you mentioned, I was leading discount product at Uber. And as a part of that, I had access and saw a lot of the impact from the types of features that we were launching. And one of the biggest ones was personalization. And so I kind of got a little bit of the idea, knew just how much impact and like how much merchants could improve their revenue and profit by launching some of these kind of relatively simple features, honestly. And so that's kind of how I took that, and with my co-founder, we started Promi, went through Y Combinator, and since then have kind of been building and acquiring new customers and kind of entrenching ourselves in the e-commerce space. So today we're very much kind of working with a core group of customers to just continue building out and improving our machine learning model, and really kind of packing up and more automating the app that we have.
Can you talk a bit about the non-personalized world of discounting and how the Promi value prop really works, or your vision of how it's going to work out for merchants?
Yeah. I kind of think of like discounting as the Wild West of pricing. Usually it's a lot of times it's, as you kind of alluded to with the org chart before, it sits within marketing. And so marketing teams will kind of come up with, okay, we want to launch this discount for either these holiday campaigns or launch kind of an evergreen abandoned cart discount, or email campaigns just to like reward high value customers. It's a lot of kind of mix and match. There's not necessarily a ton of A/B testing. Another common one obviously is kind of inventory liquidation. And so all those things, a lot of times it's kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall. You know, what sticks? It doesn't necessarily have good, as I mentioned before, like A/B testing around it. So you don't actually know if you're driving incremental revenue. Obviously that environment is very different than the world of a place like Uber, where everything is rigorously A/B tested. We are making sure that we're getting statistically significant results before we actually launch anything widely. And a lot of kind of what we're trying to do is bring some of that sophistication to the world of discounting today. We want to be able to allow merchants to know how much incremental revenue and profit they're driving with their discounting campaigns, instead of maybe launching a ton of different or trying different things on, you know, buy 3 get this percentage off, buy 5 get that percentage off, or as I mentioned before, abandoned carts or different types of email campaigns. Kind of consolidating those and leveraging a model to be able to recommend kind of the best discount structure for merchants, instead of this kind of guesswork that happens a lot today.
So a big part of the Conveyor podcast is talking about communication. So around dealing with different stakeholders, being able to bring them on board, being able to persuade them, work towards business goals. And one thing that you just brought up is that working at Uber, you're a part of a very specific and rigorous process, testing and building experiments around discounting. Now in your startup, you're dealing with a completely different and exposed to multiple different types of communications. And we kind of painted this picture that pricing strategy is a bit challenging because when you have websites to update, e-commerce platforms and just code to update, and a lack of, probably time because of the size of these e-commerce businesses relative to Uber, there's a lot of moving pieces. It's increased in complexity. So what is that process of learning how to work with your target customer been like for you?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, a lot of these smaller merchants, and we're kind of targeting the SMBs right now, they don't have the kind of same structure as like a big company like Uber. They don't necessarily have dedicated pricing teams or product teams to kind of build things out. And as I alluded to before, we're working a lot of times with the marketing team, but I think that comes with it very different kind of considerations than what we're used to working with at Uber. So it is a lot of times kind of marketing is more on a calendar. So you're figuring out which big kind of marketing campaigns are going out when and what discount is going to be associated with those marketing campaigns. And we have to kind of learn to plug into that kind of existing infrastructure in a certain way in order to really help integrate and make sure that we're not taking too much time from the merchants. A lot of that is things like changing the way that our discounts might appear on a website, or making kind of drag and drop code blocks. So it's not necessarily an engineering team that integrates, it's just someone who has access to kind of a no code kind of platform that allows us to integrate, and making sure that it's a very quick process overall, and very lightweight. Because a lot of them, again, no engineering team that at least has bandwidth, or no kind of data science team to kind of lean in here too.
So we talked about how your product helps your customers and end users, and how you integrate and work with them in a seamless way. You enter with marketing teams in helping them with pricing, improve their discounting through personalization. Let's talk instead about what it takes to build your product. So how plugging into Shopify has opened up this possibility for supporting customers, and then also maybe touch a little bit on the data and the technology behind your engine and what makes it unique too.
Yeah. As you touched on, a lot of our go-to-market strategy has been through a Shopify app. And that really simplifies a lot of the integrations for us. We have kind of standardized APIs that we can ping to pull merchant code in a predictable schema that we can feed into our models and make sure they run appropriately. A lot of the merchant websites are built in kind of a similar way if they're on Shopify. And so we can have these kind of code blocks that they can drop in. And that also allows us to build kind of a no-code integration for these merchants. So that's helped out a lot. And I don't think that necessarily that's going to be the future of the company as well. We want to make sure that we can kind of get started and prove out that we can build a machine learning model that will generate a lot of incremental revenue. But for the state that we are today, it makes a ton of sense for us to go through Shopify and kind of take advantage.
Moving on from that is, what was your experience around becoming a part of the Shopify ecosystem? One thing I always like to think about is, your network or your community that you're joining, and getting some of the tailwinds of being supported that way. And so you're talking about how technically it is easy to integrate into a e-commerce merchant, but is there anything from a relationship standpoint that really helped you too with Shopify?
Yeah. To a certain extent, I think it's almost like a little bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to Shopify. It's a very kind of saturated market. And so I think it's been evolving over time, and it's not necessarily a new market for us. And so you have a lot of these kind of entrenched players and agencies and things like that you need to kind of either cozy up with or figure out kind of how to get their attention. Especially now when there are so many Shopify apps out there. It can be a little bit difficult to kind of stand out and prove out your unique value proposition compared to everyone else. On the flip side, because it has been kind of an established market and established platform, it has a lot of communities and conferences and kind of meetups and in like really just kind of social groups that you can be a part of. So, Shop Talk is a great conference for us to go to. There are a ton of other e-commerce conferences too. There are just Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, Slack groups that you can kind of join and insert yourself into these conversations with merchants and really understand what they're looking for and try to be helpful. And it's not always obviously just sales, it's just kind of learning from them too.
Yeah, you painted a picture of sort of two opportunities from being able to participate in this sophisticated ecosystem, this like well-developed ecosystem. On the one hand, you brought up, and you only said it in passing, how you have to cozy up or make relationships with agencies, because people will have stores and they'll be merchants, like e-commerce merchants, but they will outsource specific aspects of just running their store, maybe the fullness of their store. And that reminds me how as a ghostwriter, I have to have a very different conversation if I know that there is a in-house marketing agency or marketing leader versus talking directly to the entrepreneur, because sometimes the incentives don't exactly align with each other. So that's an interesting point. But then also the idea that these networks, there are leaders, either like local meetups or conferences, and so there's opportunity to get PR, other types of marketing, people who are just switchboard operators connecting you with someone who could be a good fit and what that does for you. But getting locked in, closed in, or riding that wave, it can be good or bad long term strategically. That's great. So what I did learn about your platform is the AI component and around personalization. And one thing you surfaced up was that there's a lot of data that's just there available. It just needs to be organized. I got a bit too into sort of what does a cookieless future look like versus what, cookies are back in vogue, that's off the table now. But you said, no, that's actually... That's we might get there, but like personalization is quite available just by looking at keywords and what you can find probably within like a SEMrush and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So broadly speaking, some of the data that we use are things like kind of categorized into three groups. There's contextual data, so that's about the session itself, and so that can be kind of even just simple time of day, day of week, geography that it's coming in from. One of the more important ones to our model is kind of referral URL, so what website the person is coming from, and that actually can be a pretty big indicator of intent to purchase. Those things typically don't rely on cookies, so that's just kind of the request that's coming in. The next category is more personal information, and so that could be how many times this person has viewed the website before, how many times they've purchased from this website before. That's really where kind of your cookies kind of come in. But a lot of times we're not relying on these third-party cookies that really are mostly eliminated, in jeopardy kind of across the board, because we're not tracking people across sites. We're just relying on the same kind of functionality that merchants use to allow, for instance, someone to log in to their website, where that kind of memory of this person is logged in, let's remember who this is as they're going through different pages. That's the same functionality that we're using to see like how many times has this person kind of viewed certain items or placed orders across the site. And so, if logins totally go away, then yes, that kind of portion of our model probably would go away, but I would take a bet that we're still going to have login functionality for most merchants out there. And then the last kind of third category that we use is just kind of shop data itself. So we'll look at profit margin across different items. We'll look at relative conversion rates across different items in order to kind of fluctuate the discounts as well there.
Do you have any other comments on So as a content marketer, I don't have a ton of sophistication around like marketing data and analytics. A lot of my stuff's very organic and almost PR based. So is there anything that you could share from across the, like, to bridge for us here around programmatic? Like, you know, we talked a bit about cookies. We've talked a bit about, you know, logins here. So is there anything else that you foresee happening in the next little bit that opens up more opportunities or challenges for marketing?
So I think there are kind of maybe some small kind of tweaks in the Shopify ecosystem that could kind of really open this up. I heard talk about almost like shared logins across Shopify retailers. So if you log in on one Shopify site, then it'll allow you to kind of log in across multiple Shopify sites without actually kind of re-entering all of your information, which I think is beneficial for a lot of customers because they don't have to keep logging in, but it's also beneficial for someone like us because then we can just better make sure that we have the information on your view history and transaction history and things like that too. Other than that, I mean, like that's maybe kind of a very proximate and zoomed in change that will kind of happen potentially in the ecosystem. I think there are broader changes in kind of like email and SMS marketing. I'm a little bit of the opinion that like well, I'll preface this by saying that I am not an email marketer or a text marketer by any means, but I do feel like a lot of the kind of AI tools that have really kind of ramped up the amount of email outbound campaigns for these merchants have kind of led to drowning out the impact of each individual email that a customer receives. And so I could kind of see that increasing over time. And then really the question is, you know, how do you still get people's attention if you're really diluting the impact of some of these channels out there? And it might be, you know, maybe ads are more impactful or things like that, but I'm not exactly sure where that ecosystem is going.
I could corroborate. I think that maybe the last 12, 18 months, email was definitely, there was a big move towards email, but now it's almost as saturated as any sort of social feed or chat type of function that anyone is using at the moment. Email is definitely getting saturated. And so where do we go next is the big question.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about your customers and how you provide value for them. We talked about how you've built the product, who you use Shopify, the data that you use to create the algorithm. Let's talk about Promi itself and you specifically. So let's begin with a good one. So what has the Y Combinator experience been like in terms of supporting your business and helping you with your relationships, communications, things like that?
Yeah. I can only say good things about our experience with Y Combinator. It definitely gave us a lot of kind of guidance. Obviously, they have a capital investment as well, so just some money to get us started. A ton of visibility. So when you're a Y Combinator startup, there are kind of different launches you go through where Y Combinator will put you kind of on their page, and also with getting the attention of investors with demo day. It really helps get your name out there and get you to talk to a lot of investors and kind of raise your seed round. One of the other things, like that's all super helpful. Talking to the partner obviously is very helpful, and getting advice on just like, you know, what's important, how to prioritize different things for your startup, and finding product market fit. Another big thing that YC provides is a community of startups. So one of the kind of issues that I found often when kind of going through the early stages was there's this need for me to benchmark and kind of understand, is this the typical process? You know, if things are not going well, or if you're really kind of struggling to find a product that people care about, it's really helpful, I find, to go talk to everyone else in your class in YC and realize, hey, everyone's going through the same thing. This is just a part of starting a company. And so it really gives you a lot of confidence to say, okay, I just need to push through. Like, this isn't like it's necessarily a bad idea, or this isn't that like I should stop. It's just that I need to kind of keep working at this and keep pushing.
All of the entrepreneurship research, so Kaufman Fellows, things like that, they show that peer-based learning is the most over-indexed thing for entrepreneurs as like a category of people. So the idea is you want to find someone who is 1 step or 2 steps ahead of you, not too far, not like, big VC, because they won't really feel what you're doing, but a couple steps ahead of you, because what that does is it evokes this like, oh, I can get there, but also I know who to lean on to get there too. So you're sharing a great example around how your peers, like peer advisors, peer network, is incredibly valuable. One thing you did share too is that I find that there's two categories of entrepreneurs, maybe 3 actually, but 2. One of them are, let's say, university graduates. They just have a vision. They're like, I don't know anything about this thing. I'm just going to go and build it. And that's kind of the romantic ideal of an entrepreneur. But then the second category is a subject matter expert, someone who's earned 20 years of experience or so, or longer, or shorter in a very intense period, something that they've learned, and then they take that skill set out and build it. And I think that you squarely fit into that from your Uber experience. But let's talk about the process of business building. So being someone who came from a high growth tech startup, you're obviously specialized labor in that role. So you might not have the full generalist experience around being an entrepreneur. What's that been like? Who have you leaned on to help grow your business?
Yeah, this is another area where I think YC comes in helpful. A lot of times in a lot of our class, I've noticed, is very kind of technical first, or domain experts first. And then the idea is that it's easier to kind of take those people and teach them some of the other functions required to run a business. So sales kind of being number 1. And that was kind of the case with me, where the biggest gap for me was understanding sales and how to kind of run those calls, generate leads, manage a pipeline, things like that. And so we had kind of crash courses a lot of times in YC, where they would kind of break down, this is kind of how you should think about things. And there were some talks. I think they gave us some books too. And so we'd kind of read up on those. And obviously it helps because you're also going through the process of actually trying to sell while it's happening. And so you get that kind of real-time feedback loop too. That was a big kind of portion. Even kind of like unpacking that a little bit. It's even things like managing your outbound campaigns, or running ads, or standing up your own kind of lead gen website, or what is your social strategy on kind of when you post, what type of content you post, things like that. So there's obviously a ton to unpack there. And then I personally think that's probably like one of the most important kind of aspects that I didn't know about the business going in. And then obviously there's a ton of just like admin in setting up a business and like how all that stuff works. And, to the most extent possible, I try to kind of automate that and lean on some other platforms. So things like, stock plans and compensation for employees, and just making sure you have kind of all that buttoned up. Another kind of area that we're starting to kind of get into more is hiring. And hiring obviously is really, really important for startups. I fortunately had some experience hiring at Uber, so I leaned on that. But you always need to know kind of what is a competitive compensation in the market today. And there's a lot fewer kind of guardrails and training wheels when you're hiring for your own company versus when you're kind of hiring for Uber. and just deciding kind of what function you want to have, or how senior or junior, and things like that. I'm helping to hire with engineers now, which I was primarily just hiring for product managers at Uber. So there's still a lot more to learn in that too.
So there's obviously it's not hard, but you don't necessarily want to learn all the details as you're building around the hard administrative, the steps for building a business. You're getting your LLC set up, stock option plans, even, booby traps around hiring and just knowing like labor laws and things like that, right? But now that I think about it, as a product manager, the soft skills and even just the day-to-day must be very, I'm going to guess it's very similar to being an entrepreneur. Do you agree? Do you think that being a product manager prepared you for being an entrepreneur?
The short answer is yes, actually. But I think there's kind of a lot behind that. It's funny. Product manager to me is a role that changes a ton depending on the company that you're in. And so there's kind of a startup product manager that a lot of times you're working in kind of Jira, grouping backlogs, sprint planning, things like that, versus product manager at Uber, which is much more kind of high level focused. You're like looking at the overall roadmap. You're trying to decide how many resources your team needs. What are the priorities for any given day, a week, a month, kind of 6 months. I found that while the things that I do on a day-to-day basis tactically are pretty different a lot of times when running a startup, aka running kind of sales things, setting up outbound campaigns, managing kind of social media and things like that, like the approach that I have is very similar to a product manager. I find that product management, it's very much or at least at Uber, I would sit down and very frequently think like, what is the next biggest priority for me right now? And, how do I balance kind of the resources across the team in order to achieve those priorities very quickly? And I find myself doing that all the time, obviously, as a business owner. What is the next most important thing that we do? Is that hire an additional engineer? Is that kind of make sure this engineer who's working on the most critical next piece of our roadmap has good clarity and is building well and is on time with their development? Is it getting additional customers? So that aspect of product management, I think, has been super helpful in transitioning to an entrepreneur.
What about the relationship aspect of being the early stage entrepreneur and being a product manager? My experience as a product manager is that you're leading. You have a lot of autonomy, usually, and it might be slightly, it's definitely different at Uber. I don't have experience there, but I know that as a product manager, you are responsible for something relatively new or to change something that exists and make it new. You're generally persuading cross-functional teams, so development, marketing, possibly, managing up with leadership, and that's a double-edged sword because you aren't necessarily having direct reports that are accountable directly to you. You have to kind of persuade and fight for airtime. You have to fight for attention, and I can really see how those skills as a successful product manager could translate well to an entrepreneur, especially when you're probably fighting for case studies, initial test groups, getting attention for making this thing a priority to change a business owner. So tell me more about sort of the overlap between relationships and those skills.
Yeah, you're totally right that at Uber, a lot of the job as a product manager is talking to different teams, kind of getting alignment on what should be built in the roadmap. If you want to partner with another team to build something, that's important. Almost everything you touch at Uber is going to impact multiple teams when you launch a new feature. So that's very important. And I think that like that does really lend itself well to kind of running a company too, like that kind of personal touch, that building a business case, things along those lines. A little bit of the difference is, there's a lot more kind of persuasion, I suppose, required at this stage, at least for us, at Uber, where you're kind of persuading different teams to kind of lend you resources and things like that. Whereas, as an entrepreneur, you kind of have the final say, and you're working with your team to make sure that it gets built. There is, I suppose, a decent amount of persuasion on things like sales calls, or even like hiring calls too, if you're trying to get someone to kind of join the team. But broadly, I do think product management appeals to personable people in general who like having conversations with others. There is an element of kind of motivating the team also, and making sure that they are excited about what they're working on and believe that there is a vision kind of and successful future in play. And that obviously is a big part of being an entrepreneur too.
I think that's a really good lens to think about how you develop, communicate, projects that sort of scaffold on and build a business. So you developing that skill of like getting an early team together, persuading, casting a vision on how to like frame something up. And then eventually the last part is like hiring and delegating the like repetition of it eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move on to the next, development or thing to improve. So that's really interesting. So tell me about how that works with, working with your initial customer segment group. So what's it like? I bet at Uber, you're like, you convince them, but then you write it down and then you're like resources allocated. Whereas when you're selling and convincing with an early customer segment, you're like, okay, I've got his attention now, but was that real? Or is this actually being implemented? Or is it happening 6 months from now? What's it like?
Yeah, well, so one of the benefits of being kind of the founder on sales calls and doing founder-led sales is like, depending on the customer who comes in, you can make promises for what's going to be on the roadmap and like what the relative prioritization is for them. So if a new feature is really, really important for them, and this is going to be a big account, it probably is worth kind of shifting the roadmap around in order to make that happen. And so that, I think, is a big benefit of founder-led sales versus kind of having that sales team when you're like a little bit scaled up, where it's, they have to then go back to engineering and make sure that it makes sense for them to kind of shift around the roadmap and things like that. But it can all be live kind of on the call. So that's obviously kind of a big benefit. Did that answer your question?
I think so. Tell me more sort of structurally around these early customer segments, testing the product, sort of these iterations. I think that there's something to be learned from how you are taking what you did at Uber and like structuring these things for anyone else who wants to basically bring a product to market.
Totally. Yeah. So a lot of times a startup will kind of have a core group of what they call design partners. So it's those early merchants or early customers just testing the app and giving feedback and very engaged. And as an entrepreneur, you're trying to get a lot of feedback, obviously, from your customers so that they can tell you what they want built. But then you want to obviously make sure that it's scalable, and you're kind of building towards some vision that will benefits a large number of customers instead of maybe this one kind of niche customer over here. And so a lot of times there's like a little bit of an art on taking that feedback and understanding which ones are important to build in versus which ones you may actually just push back on and say, hey, we're not actually going to do that. Like, we don't want to be this app that I think you're kind of want us to be too. And sometimes that can be like lead to very hard conversations where, you only have early time for us, you only have, a handful of customers, and they are asking for things where you're not convinced that there's a lot of value for the broader market in that, and you have to cut these customers. And I think it's still important to do. Obviously, you don't want to be pushed around by your customer base too much. And that's a little bit of the art of being an entrepreneur and like kind of an early startup is figuring out your vision and how it can kind of align with what the market needs.
Well, tell me about your team today. So you have a co-founder that you met at Uber. How are you gelling as you're building? When I think of SF and just YC backed companies, I'm just like, go, 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 go. And so how do you, make sure the soft skills, the culture is being developed with each other?
Yeah. One of the biggest reasons that startup fail, obviously, is co-founder breakups. There's just kind of a mismatch on what each co-founder wants. We have worked really well together, I think, and a couple of reasons for that. One, we have very complementary skill sets that we're bringing to the table. So he is technical. He kind of owns all things engineering with the business, and I trust him to do those things because I know he's a great engineer. I, on the other hand, am kind of bringing in a lot of that domain expertise, and then I handle everything else non-engineering related for the business. And I think it's helpful because we're not stepping on each other's toes. I'm not telling him how to do his job. He's not telling me how to do my job. And so that kind of works pretty well to build kind of trust and know that the other person is doing the right thing for the company. A couple things on top of that have made us work well. We're both coming from Uber, so we have very similar expectations on building products and launching them and kind of what that life cycle looks like. He was a tech lead, I was a product manager, and so there's a lot of experience, obviously, on me working with tech leads at Uber and him working with product managers at Uber. And so the roles and responsibilities were just very clear from the start. And so those things have really ended up working well. Beyond that, I think there's kind of demeanor things, and it's like there is a bit of a, do I vibe with this person to a certain extent, where it's, do they have a temper? Is there a little bit of an ego? Things like that. And you just want to make sure that sometimes it's a good thing to have ego. Sometimes, you don't want to be too much of a pushover too. So just finding the right balance and all those things and making sure that you are kind of on the same wavelength as to like what to expect as far as, how much to push, how much ego is good, things like that.
And how, what's sort of your extended team? What's your head count and any like super core advisors that are going to ride or die with you to the end type of thing?
Yeah, so we're 4 people right now, and we've been scaling up kind of the engineering team. That's definitely the kind of primary focus for us right now as we're building out more product. Advisors, we've been lucky with some investors who kind of come in and can help advise us. Obviously, YC does very well with providing us kind of a partner to talk to give us advice. And I mean, broadly speaking, when we're trying to build the culture of the team, a lot of what we're looking for, and myself and my co-founder really believe in, is taking scaling maybe a little bit more slowly, but really spending time to find the right people for the job, and maybe paying a little bit more in order to get those right people for the job. So we believe in a very kind of transparent, curious environment. I like to kind of whiteboard with everyone and kind of really understand what they're thinking and have valuable opinions from kind of all parts of the team, instead of this just kind of top-down approach, I suppose. And I do think that like it's really important to try to build the sense of ownership with the people on your team too. And that can be from just giving them more kind of leeway and autonomy to kind of build things. It can be from like encouraging and like asking their opinions on different topics. Ideally, I think the best kind of employee for us is someone who is very excited about contributing. They are going to be suggesting ideas on their own. They're going to be working mostly probably kind of without necessary like oversight from us, but they're pulling us in when they think it's going to be helpful to kind of get more opinions on what they're building, instead of vice versa, where it's like us kind of constantly asking them like, how's this going? What's going on? Things like that.
Yeah, I like the I have a relatively small team too, and so having the core, you know it when you know it. Like, we've brought in contractors and we have this process where we kind of crawl, walk, run with projects, and then they get more integrated into the team. And you kind of get a second sense of whether they will be a fit. And quite often, it's waiting too long where the regret comes in, usually. What communications tools or rituals do you use? Did you basically copy and paste from Uber with Slack or Teams or something like that, or what do you do?
Yeah, a little bit. So we typically do kind of one-on-ones with our team members. I do a daily one-on-one with my co-founder just because there's so much to talk through. We do stand-ups pretty much every day, so everyone can kind of chat about their projects, if they have any blockers, things along those lines. We do a weekly roadmap review also, so we can talk through the kind of broader priorities for the business on, what projects are kind of coming down the pipeline, things like that. And then most of those things we did kind of borrow from Uber. There's probably a little bit more frequent touch bases just because we're shipping things a lot faster than we were at Uber, just because we're a startup and have to. But a lot of those kind of principles obviously are kind of ported over to.
Really, really appreciate the chat today. So today we learned about Promi with Peter Moot. We learned about getting the early momentum from an SF-based company from the lens of a expert product manager. Really appreciate it, Peter. If you have any closing thoughts, call to action, what are you trying to do right now?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. First off, I always love kind of chatting through these things. And yeah, maybe just advice to anyone who's thinking about starting a company out there. I think it's a very rewarding experience overall. Just seeing kind of a team grow, building the culture of the team, problem solving to make sure that you have that product market fit and then kind of in growing it. I think that's would encourage everyone to try it at least once in their life at some point. And it's not a big deal if it doesn't work out too.
Or join a small team too. That's what I'll say.
Yes, definitely.